Okay, let's jump right into this explainer and look at a literally game-changing shift in the world of tabletop RPGs. Picture this. You're gathered around the table on a Friday night, the snacks are out, and your imagination is firing on all cylinders as your party faces down a massive dragon. But then, right at the absolute climax of the battle, the energy completely dies. Why? Because someone has to pull out a calculator or go flipping through a giant rulebook. For decades, players have had these epic quests bogged down by slow math and overlapping rules. Well, today, we're exploring how a new system, the Multiverse Dice Master, or MDM, completely replaces that slow math with high-speed story physics. It's an amazing look at how basic game design principles can cure an identity crisis that has plagued one of the most famous game systems in the world for years. By upgrading the core mechanics, this engine essentially gives the game a vastly faster foundation and way more advanced storytelling tools than anything else on the market right now. Seriously, why does a mere 6 seconds of in-game combat take an hour to play out in real life? It's a great question, and it hits right at the most visceral pain point of modern tabletop combat. Designers actually call this the dreaded waiting room effect. You show up to play an active, heroic character, right? But the system's rules, which are always trying so hard for extreme realism through step-by-step simulation, end up turning you into a passive spectator. You're just sitting there waiting for the dungeon master to calculate modifiers, check a table, and give you mathematical permission to just swing your sword. It totally drains the excitement and turns an adrenaline-fueled battle into a tedious administrative chore. If we trace the multiverse all the way back to 1974, you can clearly see how we got here. The game has suffered from a pretty massive identity crisis over the decades. Originally, it was this gritty, survival-focused dungeon crawler. Fast forward to 2008, and the 4th edition tried to modernize things by becoming a highly tactical, almost MMO-style combat simulator. But a lot of players felt it lost that narrative magic. Then, in 2014, 5th edition swung hard the other way into a simpler, rules-light storytelling approach. The catch? That approach often lacked the underlying mechanical depth for really complex campaigns. So players and DMs are now trapped somewhere between heavy simulation and rules-light storytelling. They're trying to hold together a patchwork of disconnected rules from different eras, which just leads to absolute cognitive fatigue. To actually fix this patchwork problem, we've got to look at Jesse Schell's philosophy from The Art of Game Design. Schell makes the point that the mechanics themselves aren't the prize, the experience is. We really don't need more complex math, and we definitely don't need to memorize endless modifier tables. What we need is an experience that sustains a total suspension of disbelief. Think about it. When you're completely immersed in exploring a haunted crypt, stopping to calculate a +4 modifier against some arbitrary armor class instantly shatters the illusion. The whole philosophy here is that the rules have to serve the story, smoothly and invisibly, not the other way around. So, here is the crucial shift. We have to stop treating players like ghosts in a machine, managing spreadsheets of abstract statistics. We need to empower them with active verbs. The source material calls this moving towards story physics. You know, in tabletop circles, there's always this debate between crunch, the hard math, and fluff, the role play. But they shouldn't be fighting each other. With story physics, instead of just dully stating, I roll to attack, I got a 15, the mechanics actually encourage you to dynamically describe your cinematic leap across the tavern table. The math fades into the background so you can interact with the world naturally, rather than just doing accounting. And this is exactly how the Multiverse Dice Master engine solves that friction, through parallel processing. Let's compare it to the old way. Traditional linear simulation is a huge drain on your cognitive bandwidth. You roll initiative and you wait. You roll to hit and you wait to hear if it connects. Then you finally roll damage. MDM just completely deletes that drag. Players roll a 2d20, literally throwing 2 20-sided dice at the exact same time. That one single exciting throw simultaneously calculates your initiative turn order, whether you hit, and exactly how much damage you do. It processes all that data in parallel, crushing a 60-minute mechanical slog into a 15-minute burst of non-stop thrill. To really grasp how big of a transformation this is, let's break down the 6 key factors MDM brings to the table. We just covered parallel processing, but there's also a 1 to 100 geometric scale, modular compatibility, a variable action economy, legacy portfolio play, and an open source ethos. These aren't just band-aids for an aging system. Together, they create this beautifully cohesive framework that actually cures the game's identity crisis. It gives the game another decade or more to grow on a much faster engine. Let's dive into how these other factors actually play out at the table. First up is the underlying math, which runs on a 1 to 100 geometric scale. And the secret sauce here is that it natively breaks down into multiples of 11. Why is 11 so special?
Because it creates absolute intuitive consistency across the board. Under this base 11 math, an easy check is an 11, a moderate challenge is a 22, and a hard task is a 33. And that exact same scale applies to monster challenge ratings and combat stats. The DM doesn't have to memorize a bunch of disjointed tables anymore. This unified geometry just stops cognitive fatigue in its tracks, letting everyone focus on the actual adventure.
Now, to completely kill that waiting room vibe, combat uses a variable action economy built around a real-world tactical concept called the ODA loop: observe, orient, decide, and act. The mental load is split perfectly. The DM handles the first two smoothly. They observe and orient by describing the environment and the danger. Then, the player immediately steps in to decide and act. And because initiative is just a seamless countdown from highest to lowest, rather than waiting politely in a circle, reactions, parries, and strikes can fire off at any second. It creates this chaotic, lethal ballet that feels incredibly real.
So how does that parallel processing role actually translate on your turn? Well, it becomes your action budget. Since the math is front-loaded, your roll is your currency. Let's say you roll a 35. Boom, you've hit the threshold of excellence. That incredible roll gives you the budget to swing your sword 3 times and trigger your character's signature move, all in character. Hit a 40 or higher? That's an automatic critical hit with max damage and a cleave attack that hits the next enemy. Because you know the outcome before you even speak, you get full directorial agency to narrate your own spectacular success to the whole table.
Zooming out from combat to the overall campaign, MDM heavily supports generational legacy play. Normally, you play a single, disposable hero. If they die to some random dungeon trap, your entire personal narrative momentum just hits a brick wall. But MDM shifts it so you're managing a portfolio of heroes tied to a central stronghold. You're basically managing multiversal influence. The design restrictions here breed excellence. Even if your favorite hero makes a tragic sacrifice, your stronghold is still there. Your legacy survives across the planes, so the grand story you're building keeps going without skipping a beat. To really get the genius of this, we have to look at MDM not just as a tabletop game, but as a state machine. If you aren't familiar, a state machine is an engineering concept. It's a baseline system that constantly processes multiple data inputs in real time to determine the current state of things. By applying this to a TTRPG, MDM becomes this fundamental baseline that effortlessly bridges lore, logic, and emotion. It aggregates all the tactical gamification under the hood, basically acting as an invisible story machine. It frees everyone from the administrative drag and allows for some really specialized adaptations. And because it's built like a modular state machine, it pulls off a massive win for the community. It is 100% forward and backward compatible with all previous D&D editions. Seriously, your DM can take some wild third-party homebrew they found on Reddit or dust off an old classic module from the 80s and plug it right in seamlessly. This extreme modularity, combined with that variable action economy, means every single table can have highly customized, unique games. But they are all still running cleanly within the unified state machine of the D&D multiverse. These structural perks are exactly why MDM absolutely has to remain open source. The formatting is specifically designed so artificial intelligence can step in and handle the exhausting prep work. With its open architecture, AI can instantly calculate bell curves and drop mathematical probability maps right onto that 1 to 100 scale. It can take 50 years of disjointed patchwork rules and reorganize them into a coherent encounter in seconds. By letting AI run the cold, hard logic, it completely removes the heavy lifting for the DM. They can just focus on what's actually fun, the style, the narrative flow, and making awesome memories. Which brings us to the ultimate vision for the future of the medium. Because the MDM core is such a solid baseline state machine, it's prepping tabletop gaming to evolve into something incredibly immersive. Imagine playing D&D where the mechanics are so smooth and invisible, it feels exactly like you're the star of an interactive movie scene, totally free from the friction of math. The source material compares this to Star Trek's holodeck, and it is spot on. That seamless, unbroken storytelling is the definitive blueprint for games over the next 50 years. By trusting a parallel processor to handle the crunch invisibly, the fun can finally move at the exact speed of your imagination. The days of the waiting room are officially over. So I'll leave you with this provocative question to chew on. When you aren't just a passive spectator waiting for mathematical permission to swing a sword, but instead you are the narrative architect of your own high-octane movie scene, what legendary stories will you bring to life? Thanks for joining me on this explainer, and keep exploring.